DC's secret Marvel advisor, Batman's teacher breaks the multiverse. Episode 81, Travel Notes of Hell's Kitchen. In the early morning of New York, a beam of light shone through the gap in the curtains, waking up Schiller, who was still asleep, with the voice of the symbiote. I'm so hungry, I want brains, eat 1 brain, eat 2 brains, eat 3 brains. Schiller helplessly sat up from the bed and said, You're still hungry? The symbiote didn't respond to him, just humming to himself. Schiller got up and washed up, and the symbiote asked, Aren't they coming? Who? Those brains. So in your eyes, superheroes are just brains? XD, but if you have to say that, there's no problem. After all, there aren't many superheroes in which the brains are a major component, and most of them have gathered around him. I'm so hungry, I want to eat the blue-eyed brain first, and save the brown-eyed one for tomorrow. Schiller realized that the symbiote really was hungry. He constantly conveyed a feeling of hunger to Schiller's mind through his brainwaves, making Schiller feel a bit hungry too. He went to the kitchen first, opened the refrigerator door, and took out some chocolate to eat, but the symbiote didn't stop calling out for food at all. What puzzled Schiller was that he had spent quite some time in the DC universe this time. As a result, on the night he met Godfather, he was almost delirious with exhaustion. Schiller was not someone who needed a lot of sleep. When he was working, he relied on coffee to stay alert, and he could get by with just 4 hours of sleep a day. This state could last for a week, and he didn't feel tired at all. But on the day before he came to the Marvel Universe, he had only slept for 1 day because he was with Gordon, and he was full of fatigue and sleepiness. This made Schiller think about his ability to travel between 2 worlds. Where did this ability come from? What are the limitations? After thinking for a while, Schiller realized that he couldn't get any answers from the existing clues, so he decided to solve the symbiote's hunger problem first. The symbiote wanted brains to eat, and Schiller didn't mind finding a few criminals' brains to eat in Hell's Kitchen. He wasn't Batman, so he didn't follow any no-killing rule. Besides, although Hell's Kitchen wasn't as notorious as Gotham, it was still possible to find some extremely wicked thugs. Would you bite someone's head off? Do you want me to do that? No, of course not. You should know that there is etiquette when dining. We can't be so bloody and uncivilized. You can just crawl into their heads and eat their brains, but don't make a mess. Okay, that works too. He really wanted to bite off someone's head in one go. Schiller thought that all symbiotes had a common ancestor, so they were surprisingly similar in certain aspects. Schiller dressed up and went out, planning to wander around Hell's Kitchen and see if he could come across a few unlucky robbers. Although Hell's Kitchen was not as bustling and simple as Gotham, it was still decent. As soon as Schiller walked to the corner store, he saw a person wearing a black down jacket with his hands in his pockets, walking in. He could feel his emotions vaguely through their psychic connection. Schiller stared at him across the street, and sure enough, he took out a handgun from his pocket and pointed it at the store's owner behind the counter. Schiller was about to walk over when he saw the store owner take out a larger gun from under the counter, pointing it at the robber. The unlucky thief raised his hands slowly and backed away, then quickly ran out of the store. Well, it seems like Schiller's luck isn't too bad. The first robber he encounters is an amateur and a foolish one at that. Attempting to rob in Hell's Kitchen with just a handgun, he's lucky he didn't get shot to pieces. Schiller continued walking forward, crossing a small bridge over a drainage ditch, passing behind an old clothing store. Hell's Kitchen is similar to Gotham in some ways. Despite the chaos and wickedness, with criminals everywhere, there is also a charming vitality and liveliness. Not far from Schiller's clinic, there is a famous street known for its graffiti. The styles of all the buildings here are colorful, and the structures of the houses look like they are made of stacked colorful shipping containers. The alleys are narrow and small, and the various storefronts are filled with retro styles from the 1930s. Even the hot dog stands have shack-like structures made of metal sheets, covered in exaggerated colorful graffiti. One cannot deny that this vibrant and colorful style appearing in such a slum area seems absurd upon careful consideration. However, it looks harmonious and full of sunshine and energy, much different from Gotham. If there are too many people in Gotham City who are trapped by evil and sin, and too many souls struggling to survive through crime, then in Hell's Kitchen, there are also many rebels who do not want to be bound by society and actively flee from order. They live here freely and happily, bringing a unique vitality to this place. As the griddle sizzled, hot dog flipped over the hot dogs. The young man, wearing an orange and red apron with brown skin and blue eyes, raised his shovel and turned his head quickly to scoop up some French fries. He said in a cheerful Mexican accent, "Do you want to try my special chili pepper? It'll keep you awake all day. No charge." "You're from Mexico?" Schiller asked as he stood in front of hot dog's stand. "If I told you I was a born and raised American, you wouldn't believe me, but that's the truth. My mother brought me over illegally when I was very young. We crossed the border." The Mexican guy's tone was always cheerful, just like the way he made hot dogs, with a hot and spicy South American flair. She's working at a garment factory on the east side of Manhattan now. I've always liked to cook since I was young. I inherited some good cooking skills from her. Gonzalez family's hot dogs are definitely the best in all of Hell's Kitchen. You won't find a more authentic Mexico hot dog anywhere else. But isn't taco the specialty of Mexico? Forget it. You Americans can't handle corn tortillas. I used to make some tacos, but nobody bought them. You can make them? Then give me one. When I traveled to Mexico before, my favorite was corn roll and avocado soup. Gonzalez snapped his fingers and showed a warm smile. You have good taste. Gonzalez family's corn roll is also the best in all of Hell's Kitchen. As he spoke, he began to prepare the ingredients for corn roll. Several children ran over kicking a soccer ball, smelling the aroma, and surrounded the hot dog stand. Gonzalez waved his hand and said, "We don't have fried corn chips right now. Come back later." The children stretched their necks and looked around. They realized that there was nothing they wanted to eat, so they kicked the ball and ran away. Gonzalez flipped the corn tortilla while saying, "These little rascals come over every day asking for corn chips. They can finish a big bucket of corn chips in a matter of minutes. But come to think of it, I was like that too. I always felt like I couldn't eat enough when I was a kid." Are they really hungry? Of course not. The black kid who led them, his dad is a freight driver in Hell's Kitchen. Whatever is left on the truck is enough to feed their whole family. The rest of the kids' parents also have decent jobs, so they shouldn't have any problems getting enough to eat. Although the slums in New York are chaotic, they are much stronger than those in Mexico. Most people here can eat their fill. Soon, the hot dogs, tacos, and soup were ready. Gonzalez was very skillful and packed everything up quickly. As if performing a splendid acrobatic feat, he then handed it to Schiller, who paid and left more tips. Gonzalez was very happy and tapped the table with his spatula, saying, "You're a friend of Gonzalez's family, and next time you come, I'll give you a discount." Schiller waved to him and continued walking along this graffiti-filled street after leaving. In fact, there isn't much criminal activity during the daytime in Hell's Kitchen. The sunlight shines on the strange and distorted buildings, creating more beautiful light and shadow than the neatly arranged buildings on the streets of New York. Electrical wires stretch above the head to the distance, and all kinds of fancy motorcycles and paint cars are parked in stacks in narrow alleys. You can still hear children's laughter and screams in the distance. Schiller found that, like Gotham, although this place was chaotic, it had its unique vitality. If Gotham has many people with no choice, many of the people in Hell's Kitchen haven't been abandoned by society, they have abandoned the orderly society. Similarly, the gang hierarchy here is not as strict as in Gotham. If this had happened in Gotham, the guy who just rushed into the convenience store to rob would be asked which gang he belonged to, which street his gang was affiliated with, who his immediate superior was, and whether he wanted to start a war. It might even lead to a small-scale gang war. But Hell's Kitchen is different. The bosses here don't care which gang you're from. If you dare to rob, be prepared to face a hail of bullets. No matter who you are, they will pick up their guns and defend their territory to the death. In a way, the people here are more straightforward. Despite the friendly service from the Mexico hot dog guy, Schiller saw two big guns behind his hot dog cart. If any foolish gang dares to rob him, Gonzalez from Mexico will definitely show them the warmth from Mexico. But at the same time, Gonzalez is also willing to accept protection money from the gangs on this street. Gang members like to come to him for breakfast, and he even gives them discounts. There are not as many tragic stories in Hell's Kitchen as in Gotham. Most people here are just trying to make a living on the road to freedom, living as they please and indulging themselves, just like the rock music often heard in American road movies, exuding a unique sense of humor. If the devil came to Gotham, he would be stripped layer by the well-organized gangs, then invited to have a talk with the Godfather, perhaps even get a knock on the head from some guy in a tight suit, and then be sent to a mental hospital by the police if he doesn't pay. But in Hell's Kitchen, if the devil came here, the people here would grab their pots and pans and swarm him, chopping him into pieces before frying, stir-frying, and deep-frying him, and even have a culinary competition of various cuisines from different countries and races. Everyone here is a cook, and their culinary skills may not be outstanding, but almost everyone can feel joy in the process of cooking up a devilish dish. This is Hell's Kitchen, a place that pursues ultimate freedom, chaos, happiness, and indulgence. No one can be the king here, and no one is the savior here, not even the biggest gang. The people and their lives here represent the ultimate rebellion against the boring and orderly society, making this place the biggest graffiti on the map of New York, messy and colorful, impossible to erase. Episode 82, Recent Changes. After trying various plans to find some brains for the symbiote to eat, they ultimately failed because Schiller discovered that the symbiote not only actively demanded food, but also had extremely picky tastes. You see him? I bet he has killed more than 10 people. He's a thug in this gang. No, his brain doesn't smell good enough, I won't eat it. What about him? I heard he used to rob the largest bank in Manhattan. He must be bitter. In the end, they returned to Schiller at the psychological clinic empty-handed and argued with the symbiote in his mind. Why are you so picky? Can't you just compromise and eat a few ordinary criminals' brains? Why don't you drink American coffee? Schiller opened his mouth, unsure how to refute. The symbiote was becoming smarter and smarter. Fine, but you have to tell me where you want to go to drink your desired espresso. Just as Schiller finished this sentence in his mind, the door of the clinic rang, and Steve, who had just finished his morning run, walked in. The symbiote happily said, "Espresso has arrived." XD, following Captain America, was Natasha. Before Schiller could speak, a yellow figure flew over, and Natasha threw Pikachu into Schiller's arms, saying, "First of all, S.H.I.E.L.D. does not provide pet care services. But the contract. We just modified the contract. No rodents allowed." XD, this is discrimination. Why are dogs and cats allowed, but not mice? Yeah. Pikachu chimed in, hugging its arms. Why not mice? Shut up, the others said in unison. Now even dogs and cats are not allowed. We cancelled this employee benefit, and everyone agreed with it. I just left it there for a few days. A few days? Coulson changed 6 mobile phones in 7 days, Nick Fury used up all his vacation time and ran away, the UN leaders who came to inspect didn't stay for 2 days and left in a hurry. Even the lieutenant general who always likes to make trouble for S.H.I.E.L.D. bought an economy class ticket and left overnight with his own money. Natasha stood at the door, hands on her hips. This female agent was obviously very angry. The only good news is that the amount of reimbursement for the things he broke and the employee's loss of morale can increase Nick's report length next month by 50%. Schiller lowered his head and said to Pikachu, "I remember before I left, you promised me that you would behave well." He held Pikachu's 2 small hands and stared into his big, innocent eyes. Pikachu stared back with 2 round black eyes, looking very innocent. Then he wrinkled his nose and jumped onto the sofa. "Pika Pika. You've been gone for quite a long time this time," Steve said as he sat down on the sofa. "So, has anything big happened lately?" "Not really, but there are plenty of small troubles," Natasha said. "Oh?" Schiller asked as he washed a cup by the sink in the kitchen. "What kind of troubles?" "Stark and the military have completely fallen out," Natasha said. It's said that he has found conclusive evidence that the military planned the kidnapping case in Afghanistan, although I think that was Odadia's doing. "So you're saying that Odadia actually planned the case and then pinned the blame on the military? He doesn't want Stark Industries to cooperate with the military that badly? Odadia is like a mother hen guarding her eggs. He won't allow anyone to touch Stark Industries. Whoever dares to interfere with his life's work, he will do everything in his power to eliminate them." Even before Stark was kidnapped, Odadia was under a lot of pressure from the military. The military's appetite is insatiable. They want too much, and even touch on the core interests of Stark Industries. Odadia has not liked them for a long time. They initially only bought some ordinary weapons, but Stark Industries' weapons were too effective. The military wanted to obtain their technology and produce it themselves through reverse engineering, but Obadiah would never allow such a thing to happen. Natasha also leaned back on the sofa, and Steve poured her a glass of water. Natasha said, "Thank you." Then Steve said, "But I still find it ridiculous that he kidnapped Stark just to sabotage Stark's relationship with the military. Obadiah is very smart. He knows that Stark will eventually create amazing technology, and he needs to give Stark a reason to never compromise with the military, so that his lifelong efforts won't be stolen by them. As long as Stark, who holds the core technology, doesn't divulge it even at the cost of his safety, at least the core technology of Stark Industries will be preserved. But that comes at the expense of his nephew's life. Obadiah doesn't care." Natasha lit a cigarette and asked, "Do you mind if I smoke?" "Go ahead," Schiller said. Natasha looked at Steve, and Steve said, "I don't smoke, but there are plenty of people who smoke on the battlefield." "I don't mind." The female agent slowly exhaled a puff of cigarette smoke, and it seemed like she was under a lot of pressure. Stark had completely fallen out with the military, which wasn't a good thing for S.H.I.E.L.D. either. Currently, the relationship was like this: S.H.I.E.L.D. and the military had always been at odds because of the issue of military budget allocation and S.H.I.E.L.D.'s excessive law enforcement powers. Stark's conflict with S.H.I.E.L.D. was mainly due to his father and his unwillingness to be kidnapped by official organizations. Meanwhile, Stark's main conflict with the military was their overly greedy appetite and his unwillingness to have his inventions used for war. None of the parties wanted to see the other two sides unite because there would inevitably be an enemy among them. If their power was strengthened, they would not have a good time. But they also didn't want the two sides to completely fall out, because once they broke up and went to war, a third party would come in to clean up the mess. Schiller hinted, Stark and the military have fallen out, and it's probably not just because of Obadiah's doing, right? Natasha said, this is confidential, I have no right. Well, it's not really confidential. Stark wants to cooperate with the military to develop medical technology and exoskeletons, but you know, what the military wants are bigger weapons with more firepower. So, did S.H.I.E.L.D. instigate the conflict between them? We just gave them a little push from behind, and more importantly, it was the groundwork that Obadiah had laid a long time ago. Natasha knocked off some ash from her cigarette. Steve asked with some confusion, doesn't Stark realize that this might be Obadiah's conspiracy? He may have thought about it, but he's Tony Stark, Schiller said. Natasha shook her head and said, Obadiah knows his nephew too well. If he can blame everything on the military and still preserve their uncle-nephew relationship, Stark will definitely choose to deceive himself and vent his anger on the military. More importantly, Schiller poured himself a glass of water and said, Obadiah is currently lying unconscious in the hospital. He has become the victim. And whoever the victim says is the culprit, that's who it is. Steve sighed and said, perhaps Howard didn't anticipate this day when he founded Stark Industries. Perhaps he did, at least he must have realized that his genius brain and technology in his hands would be targeted by some ill-intentioned people, Schiller replied. The situation is on the brink now. Stark is very tough, even arguing with a group of generals. After General Johnson's exposure, the military has become distrustful of Hammer Industries. They are very eager to force Stark to submit. Do you think this will ultimately be resolved by force? Schiller asked Natasha. The female agent shook her head and said, they have already had a fight, and General Johnson lost. The robot army couldn't do anything to Stark, and he somehow obtained the technology of nano-armor. If he distributes it to everyone, it would be terrible. The military is anxious, but they dare not act rashly. I think it will eventually return to the negotiation table for an exchange of interests. We will have to fight again eventually, Schiller said. The military won't be willing to sit at the negotiating table so soon, because they know that if they don't give Stark a hard time, they won't have any bargaining chips to exchange for Stark Industries technology. At least for now, we are allies, Natasha said. Stark needs S.H.I.E.L.D. to bear some of the pressure for him. What do you want? His nano-armor technology? Schiller asked. I don't know. We still need to see what Director Fury wants, but S.H.I.E.L.D.'s approach is different from the military's. Even if we obtain a large amount of nano-armor, there will be no personnel to use it. Agents are not suitable to wear that thing. Maybe Nick has other plans. Has he ever considered having Stark create armor for the agents? Natasha extinguished her cigarette butt and said, you don't really understand how agents work. In simple terms, having an extra set of armor for tasks that require wearing it wouldn't significantly increase the success rate. And for tasks that don't require wearing armor, putting on armor wouldn't bring about much improvement. Agents are not superheroes. Most of us rely on our brains to make a living. Brains? Make a living? Symbiote shouted in Schiller's mind. So the medical collaboration between Stark and the military has stalled? Schiller asked. Well, it didn't really start much to begin with. Stark didn't directly provide technology, but they collaborated in research and development. The military brought in some experts, and Stark provided some technical information and funding support. Of course, now the collaboration should have terminated, Natasha said. Any results? Schiller inquired. Natasha shook her head and said, research is not child's play. How can there be significant results in such a short time? Steve said, if they could truly work together, many soldiers might benefit from it. That's impossible. Until one side comes out on top, neither side is willing to back down. They both believe they can gain more benefits. This is just an exchange of interests, not a genuine effort to benefit anyone, Natasha explained. Steve looked visibly upset and said, I understand the reasoning behind it all. Before comprehensive cooperation can truly begin, both sides need to go through numerous tests, probing each other's bottom line, and only then can a cooperative relationship be established. But sometimes I can't help but wonder, if we could really use our technology and resources where they are needed, we could save so many more people. If people think that wasteful behavior is necessary and I don't stop it, then who will sympathize with those who are not saved because of the wasted resources? Steve said, pursing his lips. Captain, I understand you have a compassionate heart, but you don't need to shoulder the blame for this mistake, Schiller said. I just feel like we can do better, and I have a bad feeling about it, Steve said, his mouth twitching. One day, those who are considered voiceless by them will eventually have someone speak up for them. By then, their way of speaking up won't be through polite inquiries, Schiller remarked. Episode 83, The Godly Ninja Spider. Peter gently pushed open the door, holding a stack of documents, and saw a middle-aged man in a white research uniform packing up his things. he said. Dr. Connors, are you leaving today? The middle-aged man had gray-white hair, looked a little haggard, and, more importantly, his right arm was empty under his research uniform, indicating that he only had one arm. Oh, it's Peter? Yes, the research collaboration has ended, and I have to leave, Dr. Connors replied. Peter gently placed the documents on Connors' desk and whispered, I'm sorry, if I were a little more skilled, maybe we could have made some progress before the end of the research. You're already very skilled, Dr. Connors said kindly. You're just a high school student, but you're smarter and work harder than the research students I've seen before. If I could, I would like to write you a recommendation letter. Thank you, but I haven't decided which university to attend yet, and I still have some time before I go to college, Peter said, moving his lips. Then where do you plan to go next? The serum research has reached the final stage, and it should be able to be completed with a similar laboratory, Peter asked. Dr. Connors looked around his office and said, there won't be any place with hardware conditions as good as Stark Tower. When they invited me, I was attracted to the hardware conditions of the laboratory here, which is why I agreed to come. He packed up his things with his remaining hand and said, but it's okay, as you said, the experiment is at the final stage. With a little more effort, I can succeed. By then, maybe not just me, but many people can regain their arms. I know many people lost their limbs in the war, and the military's financial support can barely sustain them. Those prosthetics are too expensive. If there really is a regenerative serum, they can become normal people again, Dr. Connors said excitedly, leaving a deep impression on Peter during his internship. Originally, Peter was not interning in this research group, but when he was running errands for the group leader, he met Dr. Connors, who had just been invited by the military to participate in the Stark medical research collaboration. Seeing him for the first time, Peter was very surprised because Dr. Connors had only one arm. But this did not hinder his scientific research at all. He had a brilliant mind and was considered one of the world's top experts in bionics and serum technology research. Peter was greatly shocked, because even people with all their limbs intact might not achieve such high accomplishments. So he applied to be transferred to Dr. Connors' research group. After all, he also mutated after being bitten by a spider, and he wanted to figure out what exactly caused this mutation. Peter was very smart and diligent, although he had a bit of a bookish tendency. But he was the kind of kid who teachers liked the most. Soon, Dr. Connors liked this young intern too. From Connors, Peter learned that he was originally a military doctor and a veteran. It was on the battlefield where he lost his arm, but this did not stop him from pursuing his scientific research. On the contrary, he took a different path in medicine, started researching the role of serum in living organisms, and achieved quite impressive results. When he was Dr. Connors' assistant, Peter also learned a lot about biology. After obtaining the spider mutation, Peter's brilliant mind turned even faster. With two geniuses working together, the research speed naturally soared. But just when they were only a little bit away from completing the project, the collaboration between Stark and the military ended, and these researchers had to leave the Stark building. Originally, even if this kind of invited research project was terminated halfway, the researchers could still receive their compensation. They were eager to end it soon so that they could use the remaining time to go on vacation. However, Dr. Connors was different. He wasn't here to just laze around, he genuinely wanted to develop a serum technology that could regenerate lost limbs, to restore his own body and benefit other disabled soldiers who lost limbs in wars. So inevitably, he felt somewhat disappointed, but looking at Peter's reluctant expression, Dr. Connors still said, it's okay. When you go to college, maybe I'll still be teaching at a university on the East Coast. You can come to my lab, and we can continue our research. Deal? Peter said happily. In fact, Stark had also tried to teach Peter about mech suits and artificial intelligence before, but Peter wasn't very interested. He wasn't like Stark, who was into industrialism, but he preferred exploring the unknown mysteries of humanity, such as the secrets hidden in nature or the wonders of outer space. During his studies with Dr. Connors, he learned a lot about the mysteries inside cold-blooded animals like spiders and lizards, which fascinated him. He thought being a biologist or entomologist in the future wouldn't be a bad idea. If only he could invent some technology that could save lives, just like Dr. Connors did, that would be even better. Although Peter has become Spider-Man and actively fights crime every night, as a good student, he knows that being a superhero alone is not enough for his life plan. He still wants to go to a good college, follow a planned career path, and study in a field he likes. Ideally, he would like to obtain multiple doctoral degrees, then either become a professor or establish his own research center. Perhaps due to the influence of spider mutation, Peter feels a special closeness to these cold-blooded creatures during his research with Dr. Connors. Thus, he gradually confirms his future goal. Having a clear goal greatly dissipated the sadness of parting with his teacher. After leaving Stark Tower, Peter was full of energy and ready to continue his Spider-Man career. In his last battle with Bullseye, Peter learned a lot. He found out that although he had web shooters and could swing around tall buildings, his speed was not that fast. At best, he was just a little faster than a car. Moreover, such conspicuous actions meant that as soon as he appeared, all of New York would know he was out fighting crime. By the time he got there, experienced robbers would have already vanished. In the last battle, the only plan that received collective praise was his use of the New York underground sewers. This was a great tactic since the sewer environment was not good, the walls and floors were slippery, and it was dark and damp. Ordinary people could not move around easily in there. However, Peter was different. He was Spider-Man, and he could stick to various walls and not worry about slipping on the ground. Moreover, the straight and wide ground of the sewer is like a runway tailor-made for Spider-Man. There is no traffic or pedestrians here, and he can sprint with all his strength, much faster than racing cars. Most importantly, it's discreet enough. He moves underground and then emerges from the nearest sewer opening, and no one will notice where he came from and where he went. This is especially useful when dealing with some seasoned robbers. Previously, there was a group of bank robbers, all of whom were experienced. There were 3 or 4 people just watching them. Peter had fought them before, but as soon as his figure appeared on the horizon, the group of people disappeared instantly. Later, Peter used the sewer tactics to catch them off guard. Before they could transfer the bags of cash to their car, Spider-Man crawled out of the nearest sewer cover at the street corner and punched the engine of their escape car, rendering it useless. The robbers were then caught by him. Now, Spider-Man has discovered the convenience of the sewer. For him, it is like a fast elevator that can reach any location in New York at any time. In this way, Peter began to pay attention to the construction of the sewer. New York's sewer was built early and has undergone countless renovations. There are almost no maps that can accurately draw all the sewer routes. So Peter decided to personally explore all the sewers and draw a map of the routes. Anyway, he was not busy with his studies, had plenty of time, and was fast. He could cover half of the city in a day. Today, Peter is wandering in the sewer with a map in his hand, marking the structure of the sewer with a marker. He was concentrating on drawing and didn't pay attention to the ground under his feet. His spider sense suddenly tingled and he noticed that a brick was protruding from the ground. If he continued to ignore the road, he might trip over it. So Peter put down the map in his hand, intending to finish exploring this area first. And just then, he noticed a small detail that was different. Generally speaking, most of the sewers in New York are not frequented by people, and the ground is covered with various slippery moss and grime. But here, the moss seemed to have been cleaned by something. Peter walked to the junction of the wall and the floor tiles, and found a tiny bit of white powder. He leaned in and sniffed it, realizing that it was an acidic substance, as if it was specifically used to clean moss. Who would have nothing better to do than come here to clean the floor? Peter wondered. Even he wouldn't want to stay in this dark and damp place if it wasn't for fighting crime. He continued to follow these traces and soon discovered signs of activity in a long-abandoned sewer maintenance room. It was easy to deduce that there was a smell of burnt fuel here, indicating that someone had made a fire here. Peter glanced at the iron door of the maintenance room with his keen eyesight and saw signs of someone living inside. Peter didn't use violence to break down the door, as he knew it would likely be discovered. He didn't have any lockpicking tools on hand either. So he took out his map and marked this spot, planning to come back with some tools in a few days to take another look. Regardless of who this person was, it was really strange for them to come and live in the sewer. If they were a good person forced to hide in the sewer, Peter was willing to help them. If they were a bad person, then Peter could take care of them. Episode 84, The Good Man's War, 1. Accompanied by a noisy sound and flashes of light, Stark stood in front of the interview stage. As soon as he settled, dozens of microphones immediately reached out to him. He lowered his hand to signal them to calm down. Hello, Mr. Stark. I am the special correspondent for the Global Daily, Brock. How do you respond to the criticism and accusations of neglecting human life after terminating your medical collaboration with the military? You need to understand one thing, Stark pointed his finger at the male journalist. I am not shutting down cooperation. Besides, with your small brain, you probably can't understand the difference between medical technology in the industrial field and ordinary medical technology used in hospitals. Although Stark looked spirited, his heavy dark circles betrayed the fact that he hasn't been sleeping well lately. Pepper was very busy, and the smooth operation of the Stark group relied on her entirely. Since Stark and the military fell out, he has faced various pressures from the outside world. Like this press conference, Stark swept down with his eyes. He knew that at least half of the people here had taken money from the military. They would raise various tricky questions like Brock just did, trying to shift all the responsibility to him. The journalist continued, Stark Industries' enthusiasm for medical technology research and development is significantly inferior to Osborne Industries. Does this not show that you are not as concerned about the development of human medicine as the leader of Osborne Industries, or that you have no sympathy for those patients plagued by diseases? Stark glanced at his work permit. Well, it looks like this Eddie Brock guy is just trying to pick a fight. I don't want to argue with you about this issue. Regarding the matter of stopping the medical technology cooperation project, you should ask the general. What about Stark Industries weapons? After these weapons are used in war, you refuse to develop more medical technologies to save those soldiers who are injured on the battlefield. Does this mean that Stark Industries is only concerned with profiting from war and disregarding civilian casualties? Brock spoke extremely fast, and his long paragraph came out of his mouth like a machine gun. Every angle and every question hit the nail on the head. Stark thought to himself that if he didn't have the script given to him by the military, he would truly be a genius journalist. When someone wants to pick a fight with you, no matter what you do, you will be blamed from all angles. The next day, the major newspapers in New York were filled with negative reports about Stark, with the scathing criticism from the gold medal journalist Brock at the Global Times being the most prominent. Stark knew that this was the military's way of pressuring him into submission, but he knew he had to withstand the pressure, or else Pepper would be left in a helpless situation. This recent turn of events made him think a lot about love, friendship, and family. Iron Man never retreated, not just for his lofty ideals, but also for all the people he loved. The military's propaganda campaign was effective, not only in suppressing Stark Industries' reputation, but also in promoting Osborne Industries. Osborne Industries was already skilled in biotech and medical technology, while Stark Industries was more focused on military technology. This became the media's reason for attacking Stark Industries' reputation, portraying them as a heartless and evil organization, a cancer to humanity. As if the world would be completely at peace without Stark Industries. It was impossible for these negative reports to have no impact on Stark. If they were just like gossip news, he might not have been able to bear the pressure. The problem was that Stark himself knew that the weapons he sold had harmed many people, and not everything that the media said about Stark Industries was wrong. The company had thrived on war. Just as Stark had emerged from that extreme negativity, he fell into depression once again. Meanwhile, during Peter's sewer exploration, he once again discovered signs of human activity in the sewer. Since he had discovered something last time, Peter had been paying close attention, carefully inspecting every maintenance point he came across. He then found that this sewer monster not only lived in that one location, but seemed to be roaming the sewer every day, leaving traces in 5 or 6 maintenance points in the same block. Following these traces, Peter began to approach the truth. He guessed that this monster must have a real base at one of the intersections of these activity traces. As the sewer map became more and more complete, Peter finally found the possible intersection. It was near a water reservoir in the sewer, where 4 paths extended, each corresponding to a block with activity traces. The monster had probably built a base there and established temporary bases in other blocks. This wasn't surprising, not everyone had the physical stamina of Spider-Man, who could run half the city's sewers in a day. The sewer was large, the road was long, and there were no manhole covers that led to the surface near the water reservoir. He had to establish a resting point between the manhole cover and the reservoir, or he would never be able to walk such a long distance. Peter quickly realized this point, which indicated that the mysterious figure lurking in the sewers was likely just an ordinary person. He wouldn't be able to walk several kilometers in such a damp and dark sewer, which is why he had set up multiple restrooms in the maze-like sewer system. This gave Peter confidence, because if the person on the other side was just an ordinary person caught off guard, he would surely be able to capture him. One night, Peter sneaked into the hideout in the reservoir. He knew that the mysterious figure wouldn't be here at this time, so he pried open the door of the maintenance station near the reservoir. Upon entering the maintenance station, Peter was shocked. It was filled with bottles and jars, as well as some rudimentary equipment. Peter picked up one of the bottles and took a glance. He realized that it contained some biological tissue samples. He wondered who this person was and why they were conducting experiments here. He stepped over the scattered boxes on the ground and continued to move forward, but it got even worse inside. There were many biological specimens that looked particularly terrifying under the dim lights. It was like a mad scientist's lair. This person was cautious. Besides the experimental materials, there were no data or texts left behind. Peter searched around but couldn't find any relevant identity information. A mad scientist conducting biological experiments in the New York sewers? A wicked image gradually formed in Peter's mind. XD, he couldn't let this continue. Peter thought that although the New York sewers were not often visited by people, they were still a lifeline for New York. If someone dumped dangerous experimental waste here, the entire New York could be at risk. Peter thought to himself as he walked to the door, picked up the cardboard boxes stacked high at the entrance, which were relatively dry, tore them up, lit a fire, and planned to burn down the stronghold. Although the sewer was damp, the maintenance station was still relatively dry. Once the fire was lit, the whole room quickly filled with black smoke. Peter closed the maintenance station door and watched as the fire engulfed all the experimental equipment inside. He breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, he discovered this early on. Once this mad scientist really developed some poison or gas, it would be too late. Peter, who came out of the sewer, was still somewhat uneasy. Although he destroyed one stronghold, this mad scientist might have other bases. He had to keep an eye on this place these days and try to catch him if possible. In the following days, Peter interned at Stark Industries during the day and frequented the sewer at night. Since that stronghold was destroyed, all traces of life seemed to have disappeared from the sewer. It seemed that the crazy villain had given up. Peter felt somewhat relieved. Recently, his internship was not going well either. He found that Mr. Stark was very negative. He didn't even do experiments anymore, just smoked cigarettes and drank all day. Sometimes he drank until he was drunk and passed out on the laboratory floor. Peter had to help him up. Peter had read negative reports about Stark, but he didn't believe a word of it. He felt that it was all black propaganda. Iron Man was a superhero who saved many people, not the devil without humanity that the media portrayed. Peter wanted to change this situation, but he didn't have a good way. He was not very good at these things. He didn't even dare to make a phone call to question those reports. So he came to the psychological clinic again. He felt that Dr. Schiller must have a way to turn public opinion around. Schiller had been busy finding food for the symbiote recently. When Peter arrived at the psychological clinic, Schiller was using bandages to wrap Pikachu's wound. Pikachu was jumping around on the kitchen counter while Schiller was cooking. Its tail was caught in the pot and a large clump of hair was burned off. It was now lying pitifully on the table for Schiller to treat. Peter said, "Hey, am I bothering you? Then I can come back tomorrow." "It's okay, come in. I don't have anything important to do now." Peter walked in and rubbed Pikachu's face fiercely. Pikachu wrinkled its nose and tried to dodge, but its tail was still held by Schiller. When it jumped to the side, its tail was jerked back, and it fell on the table, knocking over a pile of cups. "Behave," Schiller said. "Otherwise, your tail will be bald forever." Peter sat down in a chair next to him and said, "Doctor, have you read those reports lately? Those journalists can really make things up. Some of them even swear that they saw Mr. Stark selling weapons to those terrorists, vividly describing the negotiation scene. This is a skill that journalists rely on. If they don't have this ability, they shouldn't be in the New York journalist circle. But they are completely making up rumors." Peter angrily pounded the table and said, "Mr. Stark is not that kind of person." "Is that so? If it's all just rumors, then Stark's attitude should be the same as yours. You should feel extremely angry for your friend being slandered, and the person facing the slander should be even more angry." Peter choked up because what Schiller said made sense. When Thompson fabricated stories about him in school, he was almost exploding with anger, but why wasn't Mr. Stark angry? Why didn't he stand up and try to refute them? Even he, despite being somewhat inarticulate, still tried very hard to explain those rumors to the people around him. "Why are you so sure that what you believe in is right?" Schiller asked him. But I do know that the Stark I know is not like that." "Maybe you've only seen one side of him?" "But..." Peter clenched his fist and said, "Doctor, isn't Mr. Stark also your friend? Do you really think he's the kind of person those reports say he is?" Schiller shook his head and said, "The Stark in my eyes and the Stark in your eyes are likely completely different, just like how 1,000 people have 1,000 Hamlets in their eyes. The view of a thing always changes due to one's different perspectives. A bad person may see a good person as bad, while a bad person may see a bad person as good." Peter pounded his other hand with his fist and said, "I believe those reporters and Osborne Industries are bad people seeing bad people as good people, because they're all birds of a feather, flattering each other. And those reporters see Mr. Stark as a bad person because they can't stand good people. How do you define good and bad people?" People who do good things are good, and people who do bad things are bad? What defines good and bad things? At least, they have to be factual, not rumors, and they can't violate regulations. There's also morality, which needs to be followed, so that's doing good things, right? Do you think you flying around over New York all day doesn't violate traffic safety laws? But I did it okay, I think my intentions were good, and the outcome was good too. I saved people, right? So breaking a few rules shouldn't matter." Schiller shook his head and said, "You will eventually understand that there are no completely good or completely bad people in this world. This world is full of bad things with good intentions and outcomes, as well as good things with terrible intentions and outcomes." Peter scratched his head and said, "I feel like you're talking in riddles. If you always use a simple black and white way of thinking to observe this world, you will eventually find that these black and white things have mixed together into a blurry gray. But good things are good, and bad things are bad. I just want to help more people and do more good things, Peter said. When Peter left Schiller, his head was still a little dizzy. Schiller's metaphor of good and bad things had confused him. Peter's thinking was simple: he was a good person, so he wanted to do good things and stop bad people from doing bad things. What couldn't be explained about this? Wasn't this a simple truth? Peter shook his head. He thought his ideas were correct, and if everyone thought like him, the world would definitely be a better place. The reason there was so much crime was because those bad people refused to give up doing bad things. If everyone was a good person, then there would be no more crime in this world, right? As he walked and thought, Peter looked at his watch and realized it was still early. He had already asked his internship group leader for time off, and his uncle and aunt were probably not at home. Peter thought for a moment and decided to continue his superhero career. Peter found the nearest manhole cover and went down. He felt that for safety's sake, he should patrol the sewer to prevent the scientist monster from potential dangerous behavior. However, as soon as he entered the sewer today, Peter had a creepy feeling. This feeling was not as strong as his spider sense, but it still made his spine tingle. Reluctantly, he opened his backpack, put on his Spider-Man suit, and hid his backpack in a corner. He then continued to walk deeper into the sewer as Spider-Man. The pervasive sense of danger made Spider-Man not run as fast as before, but instead walk briskly. As he approached the area where the sink in the center of the city was located, his spider sense began to react faintly, making him feel anxious without being able to pinpoint the source of the anxiety. After walking for a while, suddenly he heard faint hissing sounds ahead, accompanied by the friction of metal scraping against stone. His spider sense suddenly reacted, and Spider-Man quickly rolled to the side to dodge a piece of slate that was thrown at him. As the debris flew, Peter looked up and saw a huge figure at the end of the dark sewer. It was a colossal creature at least 4 or 5 meters tall. As Peter got closer, he could see in the dim light of the sewer that it was a lizard walking upright, a massive lizard man that almost filled the entire space of the sewer. Spider-Man swallowed hard, realizing how small and skinny he was compared to this lizard man. But obviously, this monster had already spotted him. Peter quickly started running along the walls, with the enormous lizard man chasing closely behind, causing the ground of the sewer to shake with each of its steps. Lizard man roared fiercely, grabbing various pieces of slate and throwing them at Spider-Man. Although Spider-Man was faster, he was not much faster, and more importantly, dodging those slates left and right significantly reduced his speed. In the sewer, spider webs were not very effective, so Peter could only rely on his legs to run. However, creatures that relied on their legs to move had a weakness, which was that once their center of gravity shifted, they were prone to falling. In an attempt to dodge a piece of slate, Peter flipped to the right, but then he was scraped by a piece of stone fragment from the left, causing his balance to shift, and he ended up rolling on the ground. The huge lizard man grabbed his leg and threw him away. Peter was thrown against the wall of the sewer, coughing hard and tasting a sweet and bloody flavor in his throat. He struggled to get up, intending to prepare himself for the upcoming battle, but suddenly the lizard man shook its head as if it was dazed, and then it ignored Peter and ran in another direction. Episode 85, The Good Man's War, 2. Although Lizard Man wanted to run away on his own, Peter couldn't just let this monster go. If he were to charge up to the surface, with the size of this monster, New York would definitely be thrown into chaos. As soon as Lizard Man turned around to run back, Peter struggled to climb up and quickly crawled up the wall to follow the monster. Peter had a pretty good sense of direction. Having spent so many days in the sewer, he remembered the route very clearly. He estimated that Lizard Man didn't seem to be running randomly, but was headed towards a specific direction. Where was he going? What was he going to do there? What was going on? Then Peter remembered the biological tissue samples he saw in the maintenance point on his way to the reservoir, which included a lizard tail. Could this be the monster created by that crazy scientist? Lizard Man was running ahead while Peter was chasing behind. Perhaps the scientist didn't understand the size of the sewer, and his monster was too big. Even when running, Lizard Man had to lower his head, and in some narrower paths, he had to bend forward to move forward as the ceiling of the New York sewer was only about few meters high. This gave Peter a good opportunity to procrastinate his actions. Taking advantage of Lizard Man's inconvenience, Peter used a spider web to block his path, but this monster seemed to have retained some intelligence and was not tripped by the spider web. Instead, he retracted his body and leaped over it. Peter tried another plan. He wrapped the spider web around Lizard Man's neck, hoping to use momentum to knock him down. However, Lizard Man did not fall for his trick. He grabbed the spider web and swung Spider-Man away. Now, Spider-Man had become smarter too. When he landed, he rolled on the ground and quickly stood up. He realized that he lacked experience in dealing with such a huge monster. After all, no robber or thief could be as tall as 4 or 5 meters. Moreover, Lizard Man's most important weapons, in addition to its claws, were its huge tail. When it swept its tail, Peter was thrown onto the wall. He didn't expect this monster to have such a varied attack, and he took a heavy hit. Fortunately, he had a lot of energy and strong recovery abilities. He quickly caught up with Lizard Man. Peter realized that to deal with this monster, he had to bring him down to the ground. Although the sewer was not very advantageous for this massive monster, Spider-Man did not have much space to maneuver. The entire sewer was filled with this monster, and he couldn't even surround it with spider webs. Moreover, as the monster's direction became clearer, Peter realized that it seemed to be heading towards Stark Tower. Peter knew this very well. After exploring the sewer, he usually went to Stark Tower to intern. Peter couldn't figure out what this monster wanted, but he knew he couldn't let it run up to the surface and into Stark Tower. Stark was not in good shape at the moment. He might still be drunk and unable to operate his mech armor. If so, the hundreds or thousands of employees in the building would be in great danger. While Peter was thinking about this, the monster also realized that it would be faster to run on the surface. So, he jumped up from the nearest manhole cover. Without caring about the size of the manhole cover, Lizard Man broke through the pavement and rushed out onto the street. Peter followed closely behind. Suddenly, a monster emerged from the ground, causing chaos on the road. Over a dozen cars behind it slammed on their brakes, crashing into each other and causing a loud explosion. Spider-Man wanted to go and rescue people, but he also saw the enormous monster stepping on cars and quickly heading towards Stark Tower. Peter didn't know what to do, so he urgently activated the communication device on his wrist and shouted, "Mr. Stark. Are you there? Wake up. There's a lizard monster headed your way. Wake up." There was no response from the communication device, and Peter cursed under his breath. He then called Steve and said, "Captain. Hurry over to organize traffic. There's a monster running towards Stark Tower on the main road east of here, and people need rescue." Just as he was about to call Schiller, he noticed that the lizard man in front of him suddenly jumped and landed directly in the parking lot around Stark Tower. Peter had to quickly follow, using his spider web to stick to the glass wall of another building in Stark Tower, and then swiftly swung down, kicking the lizard man in the neck. The enormous monster staggered for a moment, but managed to maintain its balance with its tail. It reached out to grab Spider-Man, but Stark Tower consisted of 5 or 6 buildings in a surrounding structure, providing Peter with optimal mobility. Seeing the lizard man reaching out, Peter shot out another strand of spider web, swinging past him from his side. He then turned around and used another strand of spider web to stick to his arm, intending to pull the lizard man down. Lizard Man struggled and broke free from the spider web, then rushed into Stark Tower. The interior of the Stark Tower was complex, but as the building was very large, each floor had high ceilings, allowing Lizard Man to move around freely inside. Although Stark did not answer Peter's communication earlier, Jarvis was awake and heard that a monster was coming. Jarvis immediately activated the security protocols, evacuated most of the employees, and activated all available protective measures. This effectively delayed Lizard Man's actions. However, ultimately, the security protocols required authorization from Stark himself. Without the security protocols, many security doors could not be closed, and many large-scale weapons could not be used. Although Lizard Man was slowed down, he still had no effective means to deal with him. Spider-Man also realized that he lacked some powerful attack methods. During the chase inside the building, he knocked down Lizard Man several times and even tripped him up with spider web. But this big guy was too resilient. No matter how many punches Peter threw, he just shook his head. This monster seemed to have recovery abilities beyond that of ordinary people. Peter cut off one of his tails with a piece of falling glass and planned to break one of his arms next. As long as Lizard Man lost his tail, it would be much harder for him to maintain his balance. However, before Peter could take the next action, Lizard Man's tail quickly grew back. Peter swung on the ceiling with spider web while trying to use language to attract his attention, hoping to distract him from climbing upwards. "Hey, big guy. Where did you buy your instant glue? Look here, your spider dad will give you a kick, just like this." Peter swung down quickly, planning to kick Lizard Man's chest. However, this time, Lizard Man became smarter. As Peter swung over, he directly dodged to the side, grabbed Peter's leg and spun him around a few times, then threw him out. Peter crashed into a pile of desks, then flew out through a broken window. Luckily, he rolled in midair, shot a spider web at the wall, and swung back from the other side of the damaged window. Then he kicked Lizard Man in the back. Although Peter learned a lot of combat skills from Steve, he was only slightly better than using brute force. He learned to use spider webs to increase his mobility and then use gravity and inertia to strengthen his strength. Although this tactic could not completely defeat Lizard Man, it was able to slow down his pace very effectively. After all, Peter's strength was great enough that one kick would make Lizard Man stumble, and a punch would make the monster dazed for a while. The two of them ran and chased each other, pushing forward layer by layer, interfering with each other. In the end, Lizard Man climbed up to the high floors of Stark Tower. Spider-Man helplessly shouted, "Jarvis, how much longer until Mr. Stark arrives? Can you hurry up? I am activating the emergency wake-up method." "What emergency wake-up?" Peter hadn't finished speaking when a deafening roar came from inside Stark Tower. It was a rock music player with a volume of at least 100 decibels, and the huge sound waves made both Spider-Man and Lizard Man stumble. "Is this your so-called emergency wake-up method? Can't you just give him some headphones? This is simply indiscriminate attack." Peter shouted at the top of his lungs, but his voice was completely drowned out by the huge music. Jarvis turned up his own volume and said, "Mr. Stark hates noise very much. This can effectively help him sober up." As soon as Jarvis finished speaking, a mech armor flew in through the hole in the window, and Stark shouted, "Enough. Turn it off now. I'm already awake." When the music ended, Spider-Man, Iron Man, and Lizard Man all felt their heads buzzing. Spider-Man hadn't recovered from the ringing in his ears, and he was still shouting hoarsely, "Jarvis. I have to say, this is your most effective weapon." Stark didn't have time to trash talk. After all, this was his own place. He immediately made a maximum-powered dash, slamming Lizard Man out of Stark Tower. The floors here were not low, and if you fell, unless the lizard could grow wings, you would definitely end up as minced meat. But this monster seemed to have good balance. In midair, it swung its tail, hitting Stark's mech armor, and then somersaulted, hanging on the edge of the window. With a strong arm, it jumped back up and leaped straight back into the center of the battlefield. Stark seemed to have just woken up from a hangover, his mind still not very clear, and it took him a while to get up after being hit by Lizard Man. Spider-Man kept harassing Lizard Man from the side, while Stark connected to Spider-Man's communication and began to formulate a battle plan. "Listen, let's drive it to the rooftop, and then I'll use another mech armor for a sneak attack and knock him off the rooftop. He shouldn't have flight abilities, right? No, if he did, he wouldn't still be here. But his super regenerative ability is troublesome. Even if he falls, he may not die. But he definitely won't have any mobility left." Peter and Stark acted immediately, their movements were both very agile. Stark controlled the firepower inside Stark Tower and used his repulsor ray to chase Lizard Man to the rooftop. When they reached the rooftop, Stark stood at the edge of the building and fired missiles at Lizard Man non-stop. Lizard Man completely ignored Spider-Man, who was constantly harassing him, and charged towards Stark. Stark pretended to reveal a flaw and lowered his flight altitude. As expected, Lizard Man jumped up and grabbed the mech armor of Iron Man. Iron Man used the inertia to fly out of the rooftop, and they both started falling together. Originally, Stark wanted to trick him and make him jump to the edge, before smashing him away with another mech armor. However, the monster's movements were too fast. It immediately grabbed the mech armor, driven by Iron Man. Lizard Man was very strong, and the mech armor quickly caught fire. Stark shouted inside the armor, "Jarvis! Release the electricity." "Sir, we can't release the electricity now. If the mech armor is scrapped, you will be killed when falling from such a high altitude." As they fell quickly, the whistling wind sounded in Stark's ears. He said, "Release the electricity immediately. Scrap the mech armor. Launch me out. Someone will catch me." Jarvis remained silent for a second. The whole mech armor began to burst with intense electric light. Lizard Man was shocked by the pain and let go. The mech armor exploded in a burst of electric light, and the cockpit was ejected. Stark directly left the mech armor and fell through the air. Rather than saying that the height was too high, it was more accurate to say that the time spent falling from such a height saved Stark's life. A spider web came over, and Spider-Man caught Stark in the air. Soon, the wreckage of the exploded mech armor and Lizard Man fell to the ground. Amidst the flying dust, Spider-Man put Stark down. It was really a close call just now. Falling from such a height, if they had hit the ground, even God couldn't have saved them. Soon, the dust and smoke cleared, and the giant monster fell into a pit. Its limbs seemed to be all broken, and its guts turned into a mess. However, his superhuman recovery ability was constantly working. Within a few breaths, his twisted bones were gradually returning to their normal positions. Spider-Man exclaimed, "God! He can recover from this. Isn't this already a medical miracle?" Stark narrowed his eyes and said, "Indeed, this is a medical miracle. We have to subdue him quickly. If we wait for him to recover, it will be bad." As Spider-Man was about to move forward, another mech armor flew in midair and blocked him after Stark had armed himself. He said, "This self-healing ability consumes energy. His energy should be running low. Let's see his true face." Stark seemed to imply something, and Spider-Man was a little confused. What was Lizard Man's true face? A big lizard? Peter said, a few days ago, I found someone experimenting in the sewer. This monster must be the result of his experiment. We need to capture him and then find the real culprit behind the scenes. Peter was explaining to Stark how he discovered the traces in the sewer and then encountered this monster when he glanced into the pit and saw that the monster's body seemed to be shrinking continuously. In such a short time, it had shrunk to almost the same size as a normal person. Then the green and lizard-specific features on his body began to fade away. Peter gradually widened his eyes and saw a middle-aged man with gray hair lying in the large pit. Dr. Connors. Peter was shocked, beyond words. He even stuttered, how could it be? How could he? What happened to him? How could this monster be Dr. Connors? I knew this kind of super-fast recovery ability seemed familiar. Stark raised his face mask and walked into the pit, with Peter following behind him. Peter said incoherently, there must be some misunderstanding. Was he framed? How could he be a monster? Dr. Connors was a great teacher who helped me a lot, Stark appeared somewhat silent, his face under his cheeks looking haggard, as if he had just woken up from a hangover. The man lying on the ground moved, and Peter couldn't care less about many things. He quickly went over to help him up. Fortunately, although Lizard Man fell from such a high floor, his superhuman regenerative abilities had already healed most of the wounds on his body and he had returned to human form. Dr. Connors turned over with his own strength, blood covering his head, and his clothes soaked in blood. He turned his head to look at Stark and said in a low voice, I was so close, just a little more, cough, and I could have judged you, devil. Stark did not taunt his enemy with words as he had done in the past. He silently looked at Connors. Peter couldn't accept the situation in front of him. He said with some desperation, what exactly is going on? What's the matter with you two? Dr. Connors, why? There must be some misunderstanding here, right? Peter Parker. Dr. Connors closed his eyes, his tone filled with exhaustion. Spider-Man, you've ruined. He stopped, whether he didn't have the strength to continue speaking or didn't want to continue. Yes, I am Peter. Doctor, can you tell me what's going on here? Connors seemed completely exhausted, a frail researcher who didn't even have the strength to sit up anymore. He lay in the center of the large pit, his voice dry as he said, I told you this story before, but you didn't seem to listen carefully. Episode 86, Mud and Rotten People, 1, I'm a doctor, not God. Dr. Strange stood with his hands on his hips at the entrance of the operating room. And I'm a psychiatrist. I can't cure all diseases. You can't just send every patient to me for treatment. So, how is Dr. Connors doing? I don't know. You have to ask those examination instruments. I can't fully understand the data either. Then Strange saw Schiller, Stark, and Peter looking at him with a look that made him feel like a failure, and he exploded, saying loudly, what do you take doctors for? A wish machine? You send any patient with any disease to me and expect me to cure them instantly. And if I can't, do you still want to belittle my professional skills? Schiller said, okay, even if you can't cure him, can you at least introduce us to someone who can? Strange rolled his eyes and said, from his current state, you might as well pray to God. I hope you can save him. I can pay a lot of money for this, Stark said. All you ever mention is money, money. I know you're a rich person, but not everything in this world can be solved with money. You bring a half-dead body here, what can I do? Strange replied. Listen, you better do this quickly. Stark stepped forward, pointing his finger at Strange's shoulder. His tone was aggressive, and Strange was very unhappy. He pushed Stark away, saying, do you think everyone is a lackey of you rich people? As he said this, he glanced at Schiller. Schiller hadn't done anything yet, but Stark erupted first. He punched Strange in the face, and Peter hurriedly rushed up to stop him. Hey, calm down, Mr. Stark. Calm down. Strange doubled over from the punch. He rubbed his nose, and saw a little blood on his hand. He muttered a curse under his breath. Schiller grabbed his shoulder, and then dragged him away. Strange didn't want to leave, but Schiller's strength was too strong. He was dragged out of the corridor by Schiller. Just as they turned the corner, Strange shouted loudly, what are you doing? Do you think I can't beat that damn arms dealer? Don't you realize that his emotions are a bit abnormal? Do you plan to fight with a lunatic here? Strange sat down on a chair next to the hospital corridor, holding his breath, and said, I really don't understand why you guys want to bother an ordinary person like me. Either you have money, or you know those strange little tricks. Why do you have to appear in my life? Schiller opened his mouth, but still didn't say what he wanted to say. He couldn't tell Strange that someone was staring intently at his arm right now. On the other side, Peter was trying to calm down Stark. He felt that Stark was a bit too irritable. He wasn't like this before. Although Stark was occasionally very affected and sarcastic, his temper was still okay. He wouldn't explode at the slightest provocation, and most of the time he could communicate calmly. But now, Stark seemed very irritable for some reason. Peter grabbed one of Stark's arms, trying to make him turn around, but Stark sneered and swung his arm fiercely. Peter was pushed away directly. Peter was very surprised as he stared at Stark's arm. Even if Stark didn't use much strength, he was already much stronger than an ordinary person. Without the mech armor, Iron Man should be just an ordinary person. How could he push Spider-Man, who already had mutated spider powers? Peter was a little confused, but he felt that something was very wrong with Stark. He took a few steps back and saw Schiller beckoning him at the corner. He looked back at Stark again, but in the end turned and ran towards Schiller. Tony Stark stood in place, shaking his head vigorously, occasionally nodding as if talking to the air. After Peter ran over, he asked Schiller, "What's going on? Is Mr. Stark sick?" "This proves a point," Schiller said. "Alcohol can turn a person into a mess." After leaving the hospital, Stark didn't even call for his mech armor. He clenched his teeth and muttered, "Damn it. You can't do that. Peter is just a child. Let me devour his head, it will be very delicious, and you will fall in love with that feeling." A low, hoarse voice came from the air. Stark said, "Listen, you pile of mud. If you dare to control my body without permission again, I'll have Jarvis pound you into flour with a 500 decibel sonic cannon. And this matter needs to be traced back to a few days ago. Since Obadiah has been in a coma, the weapons manufacturing department of Stark Industries has almost come to a standstill." Even though Stark has little knowledge of these business matters, he realized that his uncle Obadiah was the backbone of Stark Industries' success. Without Obadiah, a lot of troubles followed. Originally, Obadiah was adept at navigating between the military, Congress, and other arms dealers, never letting anyone gain an advantage, even the military. But now, without Obadiah, Pepper was able to handle some of the business matters, but she wasn't as sensitive to political games as Obadiah was, and Stark was completely clueless. He suddenly realized that he had been living in a vacuum all along. He could just stay in the laboratory, working on his inventions every day, and the twists and turns of those tricky struggles wouldn't affect him at all. But now, without Obadiah, Stark had to face everything himself. Stark indeed had a genius-like brain, but his mind didn't turn in that direction at all. The military was putting all sorts of pressure on him, and Stark didn't have many options. He couldn't figure out the complex relationships between the various forces for a while, and even though his intelligence would allow him to learn these things sooner or later, he was still flustered at the beginning. The military seized this opportunity and acted decisively, using public opinion to put Stark Industries in a situation where it was attacked from both sides. Stark was under a lot of pressure, and it was completely different from the feeling of not being able to complete an experiment or invent something. He couldn't even find a way to vent his emotions, so he resorted to his old habit of smoking and drinking. All sorts of extreme emotions piled up in his mind, and this strong feeling caught the attention of a homeless alien. Venom symbiote, a special symbiote child who was one of the first to break away from its mother. Shane Freak, something new. Spider Tony Starkman or Venom plus Iron Man equals Venoman. As is well known, this race is attracted by all sorts of intense human emotions. Originally, Venom was attached to an ordinary journalist who had just divorced, but when this journalist interviewed Stark, Venom found that the emotions and the fascinating scent emanating from him were irresistible. So, this audacious symbiote took advantage of the opportunity when the journalist shoved the microphone in Stark's face, and instantly broke away from the original host's body and ran onto Stark's body. At first, Stark didn't notice anything wrong. Venom was an experienced symbiote who, when first parasitizing on a host, would remain dormant for a period of time to avoid causing too much resistance from the host. But soon, Stark began to feel that something was off. He wasn't an ordinary person, he had a brain cursed with knowledge. He keenly sensed that his intense negative emotions were being guided out, which drove him even crazier as he started to rely on alcohol to numb himself and ensure that those emotions wouldn't explode and hurt others. Jarvis also subtly reminded his master with some data that his psychological state and personality were beginning to shake, which meant that Stark was definitely in some kind of induced state. This state didn't last long. At that time, Lizard Man broke into Stark Tower, and Jarvis had to use emergency wake-up measures to wake up a drunken Stark. However, in reality, Stark wasn't awakened by Jarvis, but by the Venom symbiote screaming in agony due to the massive sound waves. It was then that Stark discovered that the controlled feeling he had actually came from a mysterious extraterrestrial creature parasitizing on him. The sound waves played by Jarvis made Venom running rampant inside Stark's body discover the true face of this extraterrestrial creature, a lump of black sludge. Then he found out that this extraterrestrial creature had intelligence no less than that of a human. It could not only communicate with him, but also claimed to have all of his personality and memories. Indeed, that's what Venom said to every host. This could greatly reduce their vigilance, as he would repeatedly emphasize the fact that they were symbiotic and shared the same heart. In fact, in a sense, what he said was true. Although this race didn't look very attractive, appearing sticky and gooey, in the comics, they were not an evil race. They were produced as a blank slate from birth. They were more like a lazy race and couldn't forcefully devour and erase the host's personality. Instead, they took a gentler approach to parasitizing on them, and the host and symbiote were more like partners than a relationship of control and being controlled. Scattered throughout the universe, the symbiote army has also parasitized many races, granting these extraterrestrial beings enhanced physical strength. However, they mostly choose highly intelligent species as hosts. This is because they require hosts with independent personalities to provide them with emotional energy, which is the foundation of their survival. Unlike some evil parasitic races that turn intelligent beings into mindless zombies, symbiotes cannot do this. If their hosts cannot think, then they will go hungry. Venom also understands this. If he cannot gain the trust of his host, he will end up wandering with an empty stomach every day. To him, Stark is a perfect meal ticket. In his current low point, Stark's emotions fluctuate greatly every day, providing Venom with ample energy. But soon, Venom realizes that he has underestimated the complexity of finding a meal ticket. Episode 87, Mud and Rotten People, 2, Who is Stark? Just look at his introduction in the comics, and you'll know that he's called Super Genius, Cursed by Knowledge. In the comics, he has the 8th Infinity Gem, Curse of Knowledge, in his brain. He can fully master all knowledge about black holes in just one day, which can be said to make Einstein sad and Mendeleev shed tears. XD, this led to a change that completely exceeded Venom's expectations. First of all, Stark is a person who likes to dig deep. He spent a full 6 days checking Venom's household registration. When he found out that Venom was an extraterrestrial creature, Stark's suddenly excited mood made Venom stumble. XD, from the birthplace of Venom, to how he drifted to Earth, and how he possessed host after host, Stark questioned Venom in detail. Out of respect for his long-term meal ticket, Venom tried to answer Stark's questions as much as possible, but a super genius is always like a million whys. For every question, he could come up with countless follow-up questions. Where is the symbiote's homeworld? Who created you? What kind of extraterrestrial creature is he? In what form does it exist there? Is it far from Earth? Can humans reach it within their lifetime? Will you come to invade Earth? Is your creator an independent intelligent life form, or a common consciousness of a planet? Why don't your siblings leave your mother? Why did you run away alone? Did you anger your creator? What's the difference between it and God in human religious stories? Stark would pursue each of these questions from various angles. While Venom could answer some questions, others were too abstract and creative for him to answer. According to the age of the symbiote, it is still a child. Even if it is a genius child among the symbiotes, it cannot understand the strange and creative questions of the super genius. Finally, Stark's curiosity about its origin decreased a bit. Then, Venom discovered for the first time that human emotions could be so complex. Stark's overly sensitive heart and emotional brain made Venom feel like he was living in a huge maze every day. Every time Stark's mood changed, the entire maze was completely reset, and Venom, who had just found the exit, was kicked back to the starting point. Shane freak, I am loving it. Furthermore, Stark was truly a cursed brain of knowledge. As a symbiote, Venom couldn't keep up with the speed of Stark's thoughts. Whenever Stark began to contemplate, Venom could only cower in a corner, feeling countless symbols crashing onto him that he couldn't comprehend. In other words, he was submerged in an ocean of knowledge. What was even more terrifying was that Stark would frantically reset his maze while releasing the floodgates of knowledge like a torrential downpour. Venom would bounce back and forth between these two states, unable to keep up with the speed, and would be kicked in the butt by the maze one moment and knocked down by the seawater the next. Any sentient being with emotions would have certain requirements for their living environment, and symbiotes were no exception. If living in an ordinary human body was like being in a matchbox, albeit a bit cramped and stuffy, at least it was relatively quiet. But living in Stark's body was like living on a dangerous planet full of countless storms and lightning. Although there was enough space, life here was just too exciting, and Venom couldn't even rest for a moment. Originally, symbiotes and hosts were in sync, able to constantly sense the changes in their bodies and emotions. It was their race's unique talent and the foundation upon which they relied for survival. However, now, this talent brought tremendous trouble to Venom. In sync with someone like Stark, Venom had to endure a life full of constant and unpredictable dangers, like a primitive jungle adventure. Stark was like an unsolvable puzzle, and his external appearance was only 1/1000th of him. His inner self, full of infinite philosophical ideas and wisdom, was enough to drown any outsider who attempted to peek into his heart, including this symbiote. The first emotion that Venom learned from Stark was exhaustion. This was not because Stark was tired, but because being a symbiote for Stark was truly exhausting. To make matters worse, Stark was currently in a low point of immense pressure. He couldn't relieve this pressure, so he had to find something to do to distract himself. At this moment, an intelligent creature that he could communicate with happened to appear in his body, and it was even an alien with special talents. This was like being gifted a pillow while feeling sleepy. Was there any better test subject than this? Tony Stark treated Venom as his alter ego, able to share the same brain power and fully understand him. This was truly amazing. Originally, Stark couldn't find a suitable person to share his genius ideas with. Peter was too young and couldn't handle too much pressure, Schiller was too easily shocked and only good at changing light bulbs. Stark used to have Rhodey to showcase his new inventions, but now Rhodey was gone, so Stark poured all his overflowing desire to share into Venom. When Stark stayed up all night, spending 3 full days explaining high-energy physics to Venom in his mind, Venom learned a second emotion, which was terror. XD, was this something that a symbiote should learn? This genius scientist urgently wanted to teach all the knowledge he possessed to his other self, so that he could truly discuss various inventions and ideas with himself, and have a true soulmate who could fully understand and experience everything about him. Stark was in a state of emptiness and desperate for an outlet, without considering that there was a limit to how much a symbiote could accept. He never thought that even with brainwave communication, you couldn't expect a child to learn the essence of human knowledge overnight, right? Venom was truly on the verge of a breakdown, like a student who was completely clueless but forced to attend an advanced math class. His third emotion that he learned was regret, extreme regret. Venom doesn't understand. Stark scolded him again and Venom felt wronged. What's so difficult about this? Can't you read my memories? Isn't it an open book exam? You can't even handle an open book exam? What kind of rubbish are you? For a symbiote with top learning ability, physics and math aren't difficult. What's difficult is keeping up with Stark's wild creativity and inventiveness that is closer to philosophy and mysticism. 99% of the effort is not difficult, it's the 1% inspiration that is hard. Even a symbiote couldn't fully comprehend Stark's thought leaps. Venom had been suspecting for a long time, is Stark really human? How can a human be so complex and incomprehensible? If you only say Stark has high intelligence, that's one thing, but unfortunately, his personality is also terrible. Stark left the hospital and walked on the road. Venom, who finally didn't have to stay cooped up in the laboratory with Stark, kept repeating in his mind, let's go eat a human head. Just one, bite off their brain, it must be very delicious. Has anyone told you? The brains of ordinary people are like untested zombie meat. You can't eat this unsafe food. Venom transmitted a sense of doubt. Eat healthier, like me. Don't you know? The brains of ordinary people hardly function in this lifetime, just like decaying fish meat that hasn't been treated with any preservatives. Taste. Taste is important. You understand? I absolutely won't allow you to devour that zombie meat and pollute my genius brain. XD, forget it, I know you aliens haven't eaten anything good. You're actually interested in the brains of ordinary humans, a lump of meat made up of water and protein. There's no brilliant idea that can change the world in there, like I can. If you eat this kind of thing, is your symbiote race scavenging for a living? Venom emitted a series of extremely intense and angry brain waves, but Stark didn't notice and continued to say disdainfully, are all alien tastes like this? Or is it because human brains are considered pretty good in the universe? How dumb do other aliens have to be? Are human beings the only ones in the universe with brains? I really can't believe that there's a race that considers the brains of ordinary humans as a delicacy. How resource poor must you be? Do you want some cheese balls? Earth's specialty, you can also bring some back for your poor brothers and sisters. I'll pay. We're not poor. Venom said angrily. But you behave like a country bumpkin who just came to the city, thinking everything is good. Were you interested in those chocolate balls in the convenience store just now? Come on, can you really eat so many snacks that only cost $12? Don't bother looking, I won't go to such a low-end convenience store to buy things. What? Eat the employees in that office building? What are you thinking? Those people who can't even earn enough for a cheap apartment rent in a month, you want to eat them? Those kind of people can't even pass the first round of interviews in our Stark Industries. That person who just sat in the Porsche? No way. His hair is golden, I bet he must have dyed it with some fancy dye, which is disgusting. It smells like chemicals, I want to avoid him. Turn your head back and don't look like a naive fool. Stark thought in his mind, don't embarrass me, the genius scientist and world's richest person, Stark. I'm not a silly boy who looks around while walking down the street. Shane freak, poor Venom. After speaking, he complained in his mind again, is there no one in your race who is as handsome and rich as I am? I think they would be more suitable for me. Otherwise, go find a big guy in the next door high school football team. You know, those white people who are jumpy and willing to buy you cheap chocolate. Venom said, I want to eat now. I want to eat chocolate. And I want to eat a head. Right away. Or else I will drag you and hit the wall. Not now, wait a moment, JARVIS? JARVIS? Are you there? Help me order some special chocolate from the original manufacturer in Italy. Yes, let them use the best cocoa beans. No, don't use those mass production lines. They're too dirty. I'll buy a whole production line separately. How long will it take? 3 weeks? That's pretty fast. Let them hurry up. Oh, and use a fully mechanized production process, don't let anyone's dirty hands touch what I want to eat. Packaging? No, no, no. Their gold foil packaging is too tacky. From Italy, hire a designer to design something better with the Stark Industries logo on it. Use gold and red colors, and use real gold for the gold parts, don't use dyes to fool people. Venom said, I'll starve to death in 3 weeks. Why are you so weak? Are all symbiotes idiots who only know how to eat? No. Let me go. Don't go into that convenience store. It smells like lemon-scented air freshener. Get out of there, I hate that smell. Stark stumbled around like he was fighting himself, and slammed into the glass door of the convenience store, grabbing the edge of the glass door and shouting, I won't go into this damn place. It's full of junk from the industrial production line. Even a glance pollutes my brain. Let me in. Let me eat. No, I won't go in. Go in. Venom also yelled. I won't go in. Stark yelled even louder. Go in. Venom was on the verge of breaking down. No. Stark was also hysterical. In the end, Stark sat outside the glass door. With his unwavering determination, or rather extreme melodramatic mentality, he won the battle. Venom was completely exhausted. The fourth thing he learned from Stark was to never underestimate a rotten person. Shane freak, man. XD. My stomach is hurting. Best episode. Episode 88, Mud and Rotten People, 3. Hello, Mr. Stark. Your uncle often mentions you to me. Stark rolled his eyes and bluntly said, he also often mentions you to me, General Robert. He says you're a half-brained fool. The faces of the military personnel across from him darkened. Stark was in a bad mood now. He had just finished arguing with Venom, the symbiote that had a ravenous appetite for brains and liked to slam Stark's head against walls. His head was still throbbing from the bump he had just received. He was cursing the symbiote in his mind. Please, have a seat, General Robert gestured towards a chair. No need. What do you want from me? If you have something to say it quickly. If not, I need to go back to my experiments. The military personnel seemed to be completely unaccustomed to Stark's direct style. Their previous negotiations involved half an hour of pleasantries, half an hour of small talk, half an hour of reminiscing and imagining the future, 20 minutes of bonding, and finally, 10 minutes of discussing the actual business. Stark had no interest in playing their game. It's not that he couldn't learn to be more diplomatic, he just didn't see the point. He didn't want to waste any more time with these people. As Stark put it, every word he said to these people was a waste of humanity's time. Finally, Stark sat down. General Robert was still stubbornly following his own pace and began testing Stark repeatedly. Stark didn't want to deal with him at all. Venom in his head said, you seem to hate him, can I eat his head? No, eating the brain of a stupid person will lower my IQ. Really? Of course. Can't you just beat him up? I can't. Why not? What about your tough clothes? You mean my steel combat suit? I want to wear that suit too. Do you still need to wear clothes? It looks interesting. No, that's not possible. You won't know how to operate it and you might break my combat suit. I can handle it, trust me. At that moment, Stark heard General Robert say, we are very interested in collaborating. I heard that your friend has also experienced the same difficulties recently, just like Odysseus. I sympathize with my old friend's situation. Fortunately, the military has developed a medicine that can stimulate the nerves comprehensively, awaken brain activity, and help patients who are unconscious to regain control of their body. After experimental verification, it has been shown to be very effective for patients who are comatose and unresponsive, allowing their brains to regain clarity and control of their body. Stark raised an eyebrow and said, so you guys are actually doing something productive. A lieutenant general walked in and saluted. Then, 2 researchers brought in a box and placed it on the table. After opening the lid, white mist spread out and a syringe was placed in the center of the box. Tony Stark didn't have much knowledge about medicine and pharmaceuticals. He was just about to get closer to take a look at what the syringe looked like when the venom suddenly became excited in his mind. He said, "This tastes good. Kill him, take this thing. It's delicious. It's useful for you. And for me too." Tony Stark frowned and said, "Based on what principle did you come to this conclusion?" "My genes told me." "Are your genes really reliable?" Tony Stark felt that the venom was getting more and more excited, even a little disoriented. General Robert, seeing Tony Stark trembling all over, said, "I know, Tony's condition is not good now. We are willing to help you for the sake of your uncle. We are even willing to provide you with this medicine for free. The military is very interested in the nano armor you developed, of course, not the mech armor. Our cooperation with Osborne Industries is going well, and the direction of bioarmor is also very promising. But, nanotechnology can give us an advantage in information warfare and intelligence warfare. You know, we can't lose to others in these two battlefields. This is also for the safety of more soldiers' lives. If intelligence can be more accurate, there won't be so many sacrifices." Robert seemed very emotional as he said, "I know that Stark Industries is not like what those journalists report. I know that young Stark, just like his father, is actually a hero who cares about ordinary people. From another perspective, cooperating with the military is also about safeguarding the lives of more soldiers, after all." Just as Robert was about to add fuel to the fire, he suddenly noticed that Tony Stark was trembling. He thought he had successfully broken through the genius's psychological defenses. He was about to push harder when he suddenly saw a strand of black slime climb up Tony Stark's neck. Then in an instant, a huge black monster with sharp fangs appeared in his line of sight. Venom swallowed General Robert's head in one bite, grabbed the box containing the medicine, and broke through the window. No one had expected such a sudden turn of events. One moment, Tony Stark was sitting there fine, and the next moment, a mass of slime covered his whole body, turning him into a nearly 3-meter-tall black monster. This black monster has a bright red long tongue and sharp teeth all over its mouth. It directly bit off a general's head and stole the medicine. The others were in chaos, but soon several helicopters caught up with Venom's running figure. Venom was leaping quickly on the rooftop, and even the machine gun fire from the helicopters couldn't hit him. Until he reached an open space in the suburbs, Venom stopped and directly lifted a stone to smash one of the helicopters. The unlucky guy was hit by the propeller and fell down with a cigarette in his mouth. The other helicopter also ran out of bullets and could only fly from afar, not daring to approach. Shortly after, the armed forces arrived at the scene. The struggle between Venom and Stark for control of the body slowed down their escape, and Stark desperately suppressed Venom's excitement with his willpower. Finally, Venom regained some clarity and returned to Stark's body. Stark turned back to an ordinary person, but what he faced was the armed forces surrounding him. Seeing Stark turn back to a normal person, their commander did not take it lightly, and several soldiers wearing special armor walked up. Stark saw that they were wearing mech armor, but this mech armor was the technology he had provided to the military before, and it looked somewhat old-fashioned and outdated. Stark directly took out a cigarette, and a brand new and beautiful armor was armed on his body. He made a mocking gesture and said, "Why don't you give these old-fashioned things stolen from me back to your grandpa? They're still better than crutches, right?" About a dozen soldiers wearing mech armor walked up, and the leader looked around and reached out his arm, saying, "Combat suit." Then Stark saw a layer of viscous film spread out from the bottom of the mech armor, covering the surface in an instant, then closing the gaps in the mech armor, turning the entire mech armor into a complete and integrated green biological combat suit. Stark was instantly furious. "How dare you insult my achievements with Osborn's stupid method?" Stark had never felt so angry before, even when the military used public opinion to blacken him and come out to play the good guy. In the end, what Stark was most proud of were the various inventions and creations made by his genius brain. And now, these military people actually took his mech armor and gave it to Osborne Industries for modification. They even put a bunch of sticky glue on it, turning his mech armor into an incredibly ugly biological combat suit. Stark was really about to explode with anger. He took a deep breath and asked in his mind, "Can you really operate the mech armor?" "Definitely much better than them," came the response. "All right then." Stark extended his arm covered in metal armor and said, "Combat suit." In an instant, black slime covered his entire body. Unlike the sticky and soft gelatinous appearance, the black slime was like a strong net, directly enveloping every part of the combat suit. However, the nano combat suit was not covered by the slime, but rather it was systematically disassembled by the slime, transforming into a new shape and covering the surface of the black monster. Originally, Venom was already nearly 3 meters tall, but now he had completely transformed into a steel monster over 4 meters tall. It was a monster covered in shiny black mech armor. Venom seemed to have inherited Stark's aesthetics, as his body was no longer pitted and uneven with sticky tissue, but rather covered in streamlined black armor. His head was no longer a large mouth full of sharp fangs, but had become a helmet with 2 pairs of spikes on each side and a diamond-shaped metal visor in the middle, with the lower half of his face covered by a mask. It must be said that this mech armor looked incredibly cool. It was roughly the same size as Venom, but taller, with spikes made of black slime wrapped around the metal on his shoulders, legs, and wrists. The mask on his head was somewhat reminiscent of a gas mask and had a terrifying beauty, exuding a wild charm that was somewhere between metal and punk. What's more, the symbiote that was controlling this mech armor was in sync with Stark's mind, which meant that Stark no longer needed to operate it and could control the mech armor as easily as his own arm. Stark shook his arm and felt an amazing sensation. He could even feel the texture of every external component exposed to the air, which was an incredibly satisfying feeling for a mech armor fanatic. He was the combat suit, and the combat suit was him. "Alright," Stark said, "I'll show you what a real biomech armor can do." As soon as he finished speaking, he jumped in place with a bang and landed beside the group of biomech armor soldiers, landing a punch directly on the head of one of them. The biomech armor soldier flew out directly, and Stark shook his fist in surprise. He was not used to fighting with his own fists. In the past he had always relied on Jarvis's intelligent algorithms for combat. But now, he actually had the feeling of personally using his fists to beat up enemies, and he had to admit, it felt really good. The giant black mech armor turned around, and another hook punch was thrown. Compared to the massive biomech armor monster that stood over 4 meters tall, the biomech armor soldier that was only a little over 2 meters tall was like a little chick, easily knocked away. Originally, these biomech armors were created to counter Stark's steel combat suit, but not to deal with a biomech armor monster over 4 meters tall. The biological slime used to restrict Stark's movements, the echo field used to track the flight trajectory of the steel combat suit, and the biological gel joints used to improve agility, which were originally equipped on the mech armor, were now useless. The Venom combat suit was not affected by them at all. Mucus spray? Easily torn apart. Echo field? Completely ineffective. Flexible gel joints? Shattered with a single punch. The combat style of the Venom combat suit was completely different from Stark's. The fighting style of the symbiote was, in plain terms, like swinging a mace. But his incredibly strong physical abilities and super speed healing ability allowed him to have the upper hand in this chaotic battle. In a short time, the group of biomech armor soldiers were all knocked down by Stark. However, soon after, military heavy weapons entered the scene. The Venom combat suit jumped directly onto a nearby high-rise building and continued to run madly. When he had shaken off all the pursuers, the Venom combat suit instantly retracted back into Stark's body, and the nano armor returned to Stark's body as well. He lowered his head and looked at his intact arms and the still pristine mech armor metal on them, and said, "Not bad, thanks for your help, Mud." "You're welcome, loser." Episode 89, Bad Story, 1. The hands of the watch turned back and the camera began to rewind time. When Lizard Man fell from the top of Stark Tower, Dr. Connors only remembered the sound of the whistling wind ringing in his ears. Gradually, he remembered the sound of flying debris that had once whistled past his ear. Accompanied by the immense pain of falling to the ground and the sight of blood before his eyes, Connors felt like he was in a dream. Many years ago, he was just a military doctor who had just joined the army. Like all young people of that era, they firmly believed in the ideals of defending their country, so he and his comrades in arms participated in the war with confidence. Connors could no longer remember the ambitious feelings they had at the time. The cruelty of the battlefield shattered all their dreams. Injuries, deaths, and bloodshed would not show any mercy to anyone's ideals or aspirations. When he returned home, Connors had become a scarred and battered stray dog. He received compensation, but was thrown into the corner of a sewer like a leaky garbage bag. This cruel society would not show any mercy to him for his past achievements and honors, and he began to clumsily learn how to live with one hand, like a clown on stage making people laugh with awkward movements. The sound of bottles and jars falling and shattering echoed constantly in Connor's ears. His dreams became deeper and the few colorful memories he had began to fade away, leaving behind endless darkness. He remembered the young soldier who was the most humorous in their team. When Connors saw him again, he was no longer recognizable as he had grown old. However, he still smiled and told Connors that he would be rescued soon, that the country had not abandoned him, and that he would soon become better. Most of these young people who were once full of passion did not have Connors' high level of education. Many of them had never been to college, so as long as they spoke some seemingly profound terminology, they would feel like they had been given a godsend opportunity to change their downfallen lives. From this old comrade in arms, Connors learned of a secret military plan. In his dreams, the darkness began to deepen. Connors only remembered the cold light of the computer screen flashing in his field of vision. When he saw the information recorded on a certain text, he knew that from now on, he must keep his mouth shut and remain silent forever. In this terrible scam, no clear-headed supporting role was needed. After losing an arm, Connors lost his ability to speak again and became a mute. Countless data and information became increasingly clear in his dream, surrounding and engulfing him with intense guilt and pressure that drove him almost insane. Ever since then, Connor has made up his mind that if life is destined to be a downward spiral, then he must leave a sufficiently deep mark on this land, even if he has to die here. The last word that existed in his consciousness was the name Desperate Plan, a name he couldn't forget even after so many silent nights. The cold light from the computer screen illuminated Peter's face as he searched for information in the laboratory that Dr. Connors had previously used in Stark Tower. After Dr. Connors was rushed to the hospital for treatment, Peter was consumed with guilt. He knew that the problem must have been caused by the serum that Dr. Connors had been researching. He couldn't help with the treatment, but he hoped to find a way to solve the serum by researching its data. Although Dr. Connors had withdrawn his data from Stark Tower, the research results of this collaboration belonged to Stark Industries and the military, and part of it was still stored in the data recording device terminal at Stark Tower. Peter knew that Dr. Connors had the authority to modify the data on these devices, and he hoped to find some spider web traces from them. But what surprised Peter was that the data device that Dr. Connors had used was too clean. Nobody could have even deleted the calculator's records so cleanly, leaving only a string of numbers without any explanation. Peter found it very strange. Dr. Connors was not that kind of person. He was very rigorous in his academic research and would not do something like deleting the entire solution process and leaving only a seemingly plausible result. Peter searched tirelessly on the computer, and finally he found some clues. He noticed that certain combinations of numbers seemed to follow a pattern. Peter quickly typed on the keyboard, the blue light from the screen reflected on his face and in his eyes. After a while, the light changed and Peter said, "What is this? Is it a website?" Since this data terminal device did not allow internet access, Peter had to seek help from JARVIS. JARVIS analyzed the website and found that it led to an encrypted site with multiple layers of encryption. But that didn't stop JARVIS, and soon JARVIS obtained an image from the website. Peter looked at the holographic screen in front of him and said, "What is this? It looks like a child's abstract doodle. Are you sure this is what the heavily encrypted website is trying to protect?" "That's the only thing I found, Mr. Parker." In a dimly lit laboratory, Peter crossed his arms and stared carefully at the messy lines on the paper. It was just a white paper with many black lines that seemed to have no pattern, as if drawn casually with crayons. Peter frowned and looked at it for a while, then said, "No, this picture shouldn't be viewed like this. JARVIS, can you please flatten this image and turn the lines into 3D? Like this, sir?" JARVIS did as Peter instructed, but the result still looked like a tangled mess. Peter said, "Yes, that's right. Can you straighten them into lines according to their current turning patterns?" In 1 second, the messy black curved pattern turned into a line pattern. Peter widened his eyes and said, "It's the map of the New York sewer." He quickly opened his backpack and took out his recorded paper, comparing it to the map. "Yes. That's it. It's a 3D sewer map. Look, this road is the one I always take. I've been wandering around in there for days. But what's the point? Why did Dr. Connors hide this map? Anyone who spends a few days in the sewer should be able to figure out the route, right?" Peter scratched his head and continued to look at the map, turning it over and over, and then compared it to his own route. "No, there are a few wrong routes in here. Like here, this should be turning right after the next step, but it shows turning left. There's no manhole cover here, and at the intersection of these routes, that reservoir. Dr. Connors is pointing to that reservoir. But what's there? That laboratory? But..." Peter thought for a moment, quickly put away the map in his hand, and picked up his backpack. He said, "JARVIS, keep in touch with me at all times. I may need your technical support later." "No problem, Mr. Stark has granted you most of the technical support permissions." Peter grabbed his backpack and ran out of Stark Tower, found the nearest manhole cover, and crawled into the sewer. He quickly made his way to the reservoir where the laboratory he burned down was located. Opening the door of the maintenance station, there were still charred marks left. Peter felt that something was wrong. Although this maintenance station looked like an evil laboratory, it was only an appearance. He didn't find any useful information here. On the contrary, there were various specimen samples and even some unidentified organ samples here. As an expert, Peter knew that many biological experiments were not playing with corpses like ordinary people thought. These samples that had been soaked for a long time were of no use at all. Now that he knew this laboratory was Dr. Connors' work, it seemed even stranger. Dr. Connors was also an expert. How could he carefully place a bunch of equipment and specimens that were completely useless in the experiment here? It was as if he wanted people to think it was a biological laboratory. Everything here seems to be designed for laymen, catering to their fantasies of evil scientists. Peter didn't know that Dr. Connors was the owner here before, nor did he care about the strangeness at the time. But now, when he came back here, Peter recalled the scene he saw in the laboratory. Compared to a real biological laboratory, this place was more like a carefully arranged stage. Peter became more and more confused. If this wasn't where Dr. Connors actually conducted experiments, then why did he hide a clue here? What does it refer to? Peter searched here tirelessly, feeling along the walls and floors for possible hidden doors, but he found nothing. With some disappointment, Peter left the maintenance station. He suddenly realized that the moss at the entrance of the maintenance station had also been cleaned, and some white powder was left in the corner. Peter began to think quickly. He remembered that on the road he took, some of the moss had been cleaned up, while others had not. He ran a few steps forward and saw a corner with the same trace left behind. Peter followed this artificially processed trace forward and found that on the road, there was a trace on a downward staircase, but not continuing forward. Peter followed the disappearing moss trace all the way until these traces led him to the endpoint of the sewer. There was also a maintenance station there. The door of this maintenance station was not locked, and it looked abandoned for a long time. After all, this was the bottom part of the New York sewer, a place where sunlight never reached. Peter opened the door and what he saw in front of him was just an ordinary maintenance station, with some random boxes piled up and cleaning tools that seemed to have been unused for decades. Peter waved his hand in front of his face to disperse the dust, and opened all the boxes. At the bottom, he found a box containing an unidentified object. Opening the box, Peter saw a device he had never seen before. It was a square black device, with an antenna. Peter took out his mobile phone and took a photo, then called JARVIS. Soon, JARVIS told him that it seemed to be an old data terminal with a signal transmitter, and although the version was quite old, the power was still decent. "So, what's here?" Peter asked. "You can bring it to Stark Tower, and I can perform a physical decryption," replied JARVIS. So Peter put the data terminal into his backpack and left, carrying it on his back. Episode 90, Bad Story, 2. At Stark Tower, a data cable was plugged into a device terminal, and Peter was manipulating a computer. JARVIS said, "Data transfer completed, 3%, 2%, 1%. The computer screen on Peter's side lit up, and he exclaimed, "Received." "Let me see." "Oh my God, what is all of this?" Countless pieces of information and data appeared before Peter's eyes. He couldn't believe it and said, "What is this?" These seemed to be some military personnel files. Lawrence, 35 years old, lost both arms, experimental subject number 3022. Someone is conducting experiments on retired disabled soldiers. My God, wait, what is this? Desperate plan? Peter quickly began typing on the keyboard, and the screen's light flickered on his face. He continued to browse, and his complexion started to become increasingly pale and even a little ghastly. "Mr. Parker, we have detected an issue with your heart rate. Please stop your actions immediately and take a deep breath." Peter put down his hands, took a few stumbling steps back, and then swallowed hard. He said, somewhat dryly, "We may have discovered a huge secret." Then he shook his head from side to side and looked around before saying, "JARVIS, ensure that this device cannot connect to the internet and protect the data here. I'll be back in a little while." His voice was trembling, and he appeared extremely nervous, but he still managed to calmly arrange everything and left the building with his backpack. When Schiller saw Peter, he had never seen Spider-Man look so ill. Although Peter sometimes looked a little haggard from staying up late, his lips had almost lost their color, and his body was shaking a bit, making him seem rather scattered. Schiller had not yet spoken, but Peter recited as if memorizing lines, "Listen, doctor, let me finish. I'm afraid I won't remember later. Just now, I obtained all the information on a secret plan from Dr. Connors. But I can't copy them or record them with anything, because it's too frightening. If it were to leak out, the consequences would be unimaginable. So right now, I can only tell you about this plan. It's called Desperate Plan and is a plan organized by a series of high-ranking military officers, led by General Robert, from the military Tartu faction." Peter was reciting information by heart, but due to his exceptional memory, he was able to recite it very smoothly. He continued, "This is a program aimed at stimulating the human body's super recovery ability and creating super soldiers. Their goals include rapid wound healing, limb regeneration, muscle restriction relief, and turning every soldier into a super soldier without pain or emotion. Now, this program is still in its early stages, but 16 soldiers have already undergone experimentation. All of them are retired soldiers who have lost limbs or suffered serious injuries on the battlefield. 3 of them are Dr. Connor's comrades. Because of Dr. Connor's achievements in biology and bionics, he has always had contact with the military. However, he concealed his computer from the military and therefore stole most of the information for this program during his collaboration with the military. It was because he wanted to save these soldiers that Dr. Connors continued to study the lizard serum. He did not have the ability to stop the military from continuing this program. He only wanted to use his research results to turn these soldiers into healthy and normal people in advance, so they could avoid participating in this experiment. Based on the research progress report of this program, Dr. Connors was a step too late. This batch of disabled soldiers had already received the first injection. Dr. Connors was in a hurry to complete the serum because of this, but it was precisely because he was too hasty and did not go through the final safety testing that he turned into a lizard monster. Peter said so much in one breath that Schiller saw him standing unsteadily. He helped Peter onto the sofa, poured him a glass of water, and handed him a heart rate monitoring bracelet to wear. Schiller found that Peter's heart rate was indeed abnormal, causing a superhero who had mutated into a spider to become nervous to the point of heart arrhythmia. Schiller could already imagine what Peter had seen in those materials. Peter seemed to have suffered a great shock. Those materials were not just boring experimental data, but also contained a large number of human experiment images, in simple terms, extremely inhumane content. After drinking water, Peter couldn't help but retch. Those images were much more terrifying than any bloody injuries he had ever seen. He had never seen anything so horrifying in his life. Seeing Peter run to the bathroom to vomit, Schiller asked Grey Mist in his mind, "Are you sure there's another symbiote that has bonded with Stark? When did that happen?" "I don't know, but it must be one of my kind." "I can recognize them," replied Grey Mist. Schiller pondered for a moment and thought that the symbiote that had bonded with Stark during this time period was likely Venom. After a while, Peter came back, his hand still trembling slightly. Peter said, "Doctor, we need to find a way to stop this experiment. If it continues like this, they will destroy the whole world. And those soldiers are heroes who have sacrificed everything for their country, they can't." Peter seemed to remember those images again, his complexion becoming worse. Schiller said, "Don't think about it anymore. I'll give you a simple hypnotism later, and then you can go upstairs to sleep." "No, I can't, I have to find a way, I have to find a way. I can't let these people succeed." Peter kept muttering, his mind becoming confused. Facing such cruel facts at the age of 16, and suddenly experiencing such a big shock, Peter was clearly on the verge of a breakdown. "Jarvis, are you there?" Schiller asked Peter's mobile phone. "I am, sir," replied Jarvis. "Okay, I know I may not have the authorization to access Stark's private information, but I still have to ask you, did the military invite Stark to participate in negotiations?" "Sir, actually you do have the authorization. Mr. Stark has granted you level 2 access, which includes the ability to access all external information. Indeed, I have received 7 messages from different communication frequencies within 5 days, most of which are invitations for Mr. Stark to meet at some military base." "What's Stark's attitude?" "I cannot know, nor can I reveal it." Schiller said, "The military has no bargaining chips now, and these invitations are just probes because they know that even if they call Stark over, they don't have enough bargaining chips to get what they want. If that's the case, let's give the military a bargaining chip." Peter was a little dizzy listening to this. He was not interested in this kind of thing, but he tried to think about it and said, "What does this have to do with stopping that plan? Wasn't that plan made by the military's high level?" "Yes, according to Dr. Connor's information, there is a faction in the military high level called Talto. They seem to be a political alliance, led by a general named Robert. These people are different from traditional old-school officers. They believe that the future war will be a war between superhumans, so they have always wanted the military to invest more in the training of super soldiers. It was them who came up with that terrible desperate plan, experimenting on some disabled soldiers." As Peter spoke, he began to feel a little nauseous. If this plan was just a regular surgical operation, it would be okay, but unfortunately, it was a chemical modification plan, and the disabled soldiers who received injections could become anything. It was simply an unprecedented shock to Peter's worldview. He couldn't understand how there could be such devils in this world, turning their compatriots into that kind of thing. And they were all soldiers who should have been comrades. For the first time, Peter realized that even within the same group, the exploitation of the upper class towards the lower class was endless. After squeezing out all their value, they still would not let go. There are devils in this world who only care about their own interests. I think the officers of this Talto faction should also be the ones who want to obtain mech armor technology, right? After all, the other old generals probably prefer to have more missiles or something. I want to guide Stark to meet with these people. Of course, Stark will not be willing to meet them, but if the military insists strongly enough, Stark will be annoyed and should be able to deal with it." Schiller rubbed his chin and said. Technically, it should be like this, Peter said. But what's the benefit of bringing Mr. Stark and them together? Mr. Stark wouldn't kill anyone, would he? Besides, Mr. Stark is drunk now, and we can't tell him about this plan. Even if we did, Mr. Stark couldn't just kill so many people at the military base, right? Indeed, Stark isn't capable of it. Even if he knew about this plan, he wouldn't resort to violence and directly kill those behind the scenes. He's not that kind of person. But we don't have to worry about the process. As long as the result is right, it's okay. What do you plan to do? You don't need to know yet. Come, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and feel every sense organ in your body from top to bottom. Soon, Peter slowly relaxed and fell asleep. The next day, when he went downstairs, he found Schiller tinkering with an injection syringe. Peter was curious and wanted to go closer, but suddenly, his spider sense rang out. Peter stepped back and said, "What are you doing? This thing seems dangerous." "It is indeed dangerous, but later I'll need you to transport it." "Where to?" "Dr. Connors is at the Stark Tower laboratory. Jarvis told me that the military personnel will come to receive the remaining results of the medical cooperation project today, and this will become one of the results. Of course, before that, you need to fabricate an experimental report to cover it up." Fabricate? What about the original experimental report for this thing? It went into a mental hospital with its inventor. Peter pursed his lips and said, "So you're saying this is actually a product with no records, but it works well, and that's all that matters. So what should the experimental report say?" "You need to describe it as a medicine that stimulates the nerves and activates brain activity. If it's not doing that, then what is it actually used for?" "It is actually used for that, but it has some significant side effects. However, it doesn't matter, as no one would actually use it. It's just used to give a small stimulation to an alien creature." Peter was a bit confused, as he couldn't understand the mention of an alien creature. He took Schiller's words as a metaphor he didn't understand and skipped over it. But in fact, Schiller was telling the truth, because the injection syringe contained highly concentrated fear toxin.